How to communicate your needs to a man without him feeling attacked. That's our topic today. And I'm having, I think my returning guest, Sabrina Rising, I think this is your 6th or 7th session with us. So welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. I'm so happy to be back here, Jonathan. I love talking to you.
Well, you are the NVC expert, or not expert, but I mean, you are an expert at it. By the way, folks, if you don't know what NVC, it's nonviolent communication. And we're going to talk about removing the blocks to love, because unhealthy communication is a barrier to love. And worse, a person can feel attacked. So we're going to dive into this conversation today. So Sabrina, why do you think many couples suffer with communication in relationship?
Well, because we were never taught how to communicate. It's just not, communication is not something we're inherently born with. We're primal beings. And so, most of us in early childhood, we talk about this every time, most of us didn't get a lot of our needs met. And so, we don't necessarily have the awareness, the understanding of what our needs are and the capacity to communicate them, and not just communicate them, because I think a lot of us try to communicate, which is not communicating effectively. We're not communicating in a way that invites empathetic listening and, that draws people in. Right. And so for so many of us, when our needs are not met, we feel dysregulated. And when we feel dysregulated, we get reactive. And when we get reactive, we do one of two things. We either lash out or we shut down. And when we lash out, we create big conflict, right? I create a big conflict in my relationship as a strategy to get my needs met, because this is what I did as a child. Or I shut down and I create passive aggressive strategies to get my needs met, because this is also what it was modeled for me as a child, right? And so neither one of these strategies are constructive or healthy. And they act as repellents in relationships. I mean, how many relationships have you been in, Jonathan, where you get exhausted by someone's indirectness or the passive aggressive remarks? That's a repellent. Or you get exhausted by, someone's acting out, or, big reactions and so on. So I think we've all had this experience in relationship, and it just doesn't lend to easy communication, and it really blocks out love.
Well, I think one of the challenges is, or at least something I've observed with my clients, when I'm working with someone and they're in a relationship with someone and they're struggling with, I think first, actually identifying what they're feeling. I mean, it's one thing that we talk about, feel your feelings, right? And you are always feeling your feelings, whether you're conscious of it or not. You are feeling your feelings, but actually identifying that feeling. And in some cases, there's a feeling beneath the feeling, and then there's another feeling beneath the feeling. And I think one of the challenges for couples or people in relationship, and this can be in the early stages of dating as well, is just identifying what they're feeling so they can then express what might need to come up.
100%. I mean, look, if we had parents that pulled us aside when we were having a big reaction or a big feeling as children and said, okay, this is the feeling. Do you feel this? Could you possibly be feeling that? Like, if we had some help and some guidance in terms of connecting us to our emotions and being able to name them and separate them so that we understand what's what and why this is happening to me, then, we'd all be easily versed at this, right? At least being aware of what our feelings are. But so many of us learned to suppress our emotions because they don't meet the requirements of our caregiver environment. They want us to behave, they want us to comply or conform. Parents get triggered when children lash out. And so, or when children have big feelings, perhaps, depending on what was modeled for them. And so, you might look at your own experience and say, how do I feel when someone's having a big reaction or a big emotion, right? Like, how does this make me feel, right? And that trigger usually will give you some insight in terms of, the environment that you were raised in and how your own feelings were handled, right? So we don't have awareness. And the key, 50% of this is awareness. Okay. Just being aware that when you're triggered, when you're in a reactive state, and I say this in all my videos, and we've talked about this before, pause. Pause when you're agitated. It's the most responsible thing you can do. Anything you might want to do or say in those moments of reaction are probably not going, it's probably not going to end well, you know? So just pause and learn how to regulate your nervous system. Take a deep diaphragmatic breath, you know, create that gap between what you're feeling and what you're going to do about what you're feeling. So that gap, the more you widen that gap, the more you have an opportunity to take responsibility for how you want to communicate your feelings, right? This is what separates us from animals, right? The capacity to really be aware of our reaction and then choose, you know, what am I going to say about this? Or what am I going to do about this? Or how do I want to express this in a way that's going to help me get my needs met? Okay. I
Well,
think
do
it's
you think,
important.
I was going to say, do you think one of the challenges we have is we can have mixed feelings about a person? Like, we like them, but this, or we like this, but that, you know, like all these buts or differences and such. And so, and I'm thinking particularly in romantic relationships when you have a difference between two people, you know, whether one person's a night owl, one person is a morning person. I jokingly said on a video, one person likes to put the forks down in the dishwasher, the other person likes to put the forks up, and I'm intentionally being remedial here.
Yeah.
But you can like an aspect of a person, but there's also aspects of a person you don't like, and you have mixed feelings about the person.
Yeah.
And then actually then identifying what those mixed feelings are, and then to kind of come up with, well, what am I really needing? I think this is where a lot of people struggle, is they don't even know what they need to feel better in that circumstance, other than sacrificing or compromising themselves, which oftentimes they do, or they don't set healthy boundaries for themselves. I think that seems to be the case more often than not.
Yeah. I mean, look, a feeling is just a feeling. It's a passing thing. Okay. So let's just contextualize this to give people some structure in terms of, you know, how to navigate this terrain, especially in a relationship. A feeling is a passing thing. You're going to be happy one minute and you might be pissed off the next one. You're going to be sad one minute and you might be relieved the next one. Feelings come and go, right? They're not permanent states. Okay. So if we sat there and started to communicate all of our feelings all of the time, we would never stop. Right? This would be an exhaustive process.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we want to connect the feeling to a need, because the need is permanent. The need's not going anywhere. Okay. The need is who you are. This need is not up and down like my emotions. Okay. So we want to step out of the feeling realm. We want to communicate feelings because, you know, we want to communicate feelings, and you might find that in the process of communicating feelings that you're communicating the same feeling over and over and over again. Okay. So I'll explain. So let's say I'm angry because my, you know, partner put the forks up and I put the forks down, as you said. Okay. So let's say I'm angry. We'll just use this example because it's cute. So I'm upset about this and I'm angry. I find myself angry. Right.
Yeah.
And I would say to my partner, I feel angry. I feel angry because you put the forks up when I put them down, or whatever I said. Okay. The opposite of what I said. And so what? I'm angry. Right. That doesn't help the situation. It doesn't create communication. It doesn't invite him into a conversation with me. He might care that I'm angry, but, you know, I'm not really giving him anything to go on. Right. So it's better to be aware of the anger and the trigger and to sit with it and go, okay, if I'm angry, if I'm triggered, period, it can be anger, it can be sadness, it can be loneliness, whatever the trigger is, it's because I have an unmet need. Okay. So it's better to say, I feel angry because I have a need for consistency in the way we stack the dishwasher. Example, okay? I have a need for consistency, and I feel triggered when there's an inconsistency. Would you be willing to support me in getting my need for consistency met?
Yeah.
So now I've asked my partner not to meet me at the level of anger. I haven't asked him to bail me out of my angry feelings or to help me feel better about being angry. And this is what we do. We get stuck at the surface level of help me out, bail me out of my feelings, you know, get me out of my uncomfortable emotions, come and rescue me from my pain, right? Instead of going deeper and say, can you please meet me at the level of need? Would you be willing to support my deeper need? Because the need makes sense. Right? The need makes sense to people. If I say to you, look, I have a need for consistency and I get triggered when that doesn't happen for me, you may not understand it, but you could empathize, right?
Yeah.
If you just see me angry and upset, do you want to empathize with me?
No. In fact, well, when you get well, not you, but when a person gets angry, upset, I become defensive.
Right.
And
The
yeah, I
defense,
mean,
you want to run for cover. Get out of
yeah,
here. This lady's crazy, right? Just get me out of here, right? So this is what we want to communicate to everyone that's watching.
yeah,
You can't, we spend our time, envision a child throwing a tantrum, right? This
yeah,
is us walking around in adult bodies. We're throwing
yeah,
tantrums. I don't like this and I don't like that and I don't like this and I don't like that. And, please rescue me from my pain. Right.
yeah,
And if we, as mature adults, it's our responsibility to become aware of our pain, sink into our bodies, regulate our nervous system, and go, okay, what's my unmet need? Obviously, some need of mine is not being met. This is where
Let
it
me,
takes time, right?
I
To do
want to
some,
jump in though.
yeah,
The way you described that fork scenario
yeah.
was very eloquent.
Hmm.
And I'll be candid with you, even though I think I'm a halfway good communicator, that that's a skill to actually be able to articulate it, in the way that you did. I need consistency, I need this, I need that. Like that's not easy stuff to get, like to communicate it that way. Am
Yeah.
I?
Look, I hear you. And,
Yeah,
in the early stages of practicing in nonviolent communication or any type of communication that really lends to empathetic listening, this happens to be there it is. That happens to be my favorite one, as you know. It's going to sound a little mechanical in the beginning, because you're trying on this new way, this new language, and this new way of expressing yourself.
yeah,
I recommend that everybody go get your hierarchy of needs, your list of needs, figure out what your needs are. Okay. It's free on the NVC website. You can download one of their forms and circle all of your needs and figure out what your needs are so that you can start identifying with them and understand that the unmet need is really the root of your suffering. It's the root
yeah,
of the pain in the relationship or in your life.
yeah,
We could have unmet needs at work. We could have unmet needs in our relationships with our kids. We could have unmet needs in the relationship we have with ourselves. We neglect our own needs, right? And so it's a matter of just educating yourself the same way we learn any other skill. Learning how to drive is a skill, right?
yeah,
That's a skill. We do it. We learn. We have, hundreds of people lining up every day to go get their license, to
yeah,
learn. They were driving and they want to be able to drive a car. You want to be able to be in a healthy relationship, learn what your needs are, because that's what we need to start communicating in order to create empathetic listening in our relationships. Otherwise, all we're doing is projecting our unmet needs.
yeah.
Most of us resort to passive aggressive techniques. I know this is very common. That's something that runs in my family. Just like, oh yeah, the little side comments, is something that can over time destroy the intimacy, the connection, and the safety in a relationship,
Yeah.
or even the big blowouts, which is, something I'm also familiar with, where like you're throwing tantrums to get your needs met. It's a strategy, right? Because we don't have better strategies. When we are articulate in communicating what our needs are, we can then sit down with our partners and come up with constructive strategies.
Well, so as I'm hearing this from you, I'm thinking back to my life over the last 10 years. And I've done group therapy. I mean, sometimes, once a month, with a group of people. Why
Yeah.
I'm sharing this is it was interesting when you hear, and what's great about group therapy is you're hearing other people articulate. And
Yeah.
if you're actually paying attention, because you have really no need to respond to them, it's not a dialogue. I
Yeah.
think oftentimes in romantic relationship, we have this need for, this dialogue, and you're thinking of what you need to say next to whatever's being said to you, versus when you're in group therapy and you hear one person share and another person share and another person share. And after a while at least that's how I learned how to be a better communicator, by literally listening to so many other people speak.
Yeah.
Most of us don't get the benefit of doing something like that. So other than reading the book, where does one learn this skill? I'm just curious if you even have a thought around
Learn
it.
it from me.
What's that?
You can come and learn it from me.
Okay.
you
By the
know
way, folks, if you want to connect with Sabrina, there's a link in the show notes. to Intuitive Sabrina, her website. If you want to connect with her, want to join her mailing list, it's in the show notes below.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, there's so many resources online. You know, you can YouTube NVC and learn a lot of the language structure and so on. This is just, there are many resources for people who really are, who are stuck. And this is really for people who are stuck in the same pattern of destructive dialogue in their relationship. If you're in a situation where you're having knockdown, drag out fights, and you're saying things you don't mean, and you're killing each other, even though there's so much love in the relationship, you need NVC. You really do. I mean, I recommend this for everybody, but if you're in a painful relationship, or if you're, you know, even in the dating phases, and you don't know how to communicate your needs, and you don't know how to, you know, really make sure that you're dating the right person and so on, regardless of what your scenario is, everybody should be literate when it comes to communicating their needs and advocating for their needs. Because how else are you going to determine if someone is a viable match, if someone has the you know, the potential to be a long-term significant other, you know, and if someone can hang in the conflict with you? Because how do people, you know, resolve conflict is a massive indicator of the longevity of a relationship.
Yeah. Oh, I did a video recently, and I talked about the 2 qualities I notice in every happy relationship. And the first one was just gratitude for each other, when you're in a genuine state of gratitude. But the second most common trait I see in happy couples is conflict resolution, relatively with ease. I'm not suggesting it's easy, but relatively easy. It's not, you know, the way to solve the problem is it's my way or the highway.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, by the way, we have a question in. We have a question.
Yay, I love questions.
All right. Arlene writes, do you want to read it?
Okay. Arlene writes, I was dating someone. He constantly was passive aggressive behavior and wanted to pass that behavior as a joke. I tried my best to be patient. Do you have any suggestions for future? Yeah, I do. Okay. So passive aggressive behavior, as I was mentioning earlier, is really just a strategy to get needs met. Okay. And then saying, oh, I was just joking. Oh, I was just joking is his way of abdicating personal responsibility for whatever effect his language is having on you. So that would be a red flag. Okay. So if someone is not willing to just sit with you and say, you know, I hear that bothers you. And, you know, I apologize. I'll find a better way to communicate. Like, you know, that's someone who really is not really taking responsibility for their language. Okay. So that, like I said, is a big red flag. For future, like, look, when someone is behaving in a passive aggressive way, what does it feel like? It feels repulsive, right? It's a repellent, you know, it feels like all of a sudden there's like these little threats happening in the energy and the dynamic, right? And it starts to feel unsafe, right? And it starts to become annoying to be around this person. And, you know, depending on the level of passive aggressive behavior, it can start to be exhausting, right? And all of a sudden you find that you're blocking, it's putting a wall between you and this other person. So I would communicate that need. I would say, you know, I really have a need for direct communication. For transparency. You know, the transparency is the currency of trust, right? And it's the antidote to passive aggressive behavior. And so when we create transparency in our relationships, I really have an understanding of what you might need. If you don't communicate with me directly, I have no idea what you need. I'm just guessing, right? Like, I really care about both of us getting our needs met in this relationship. You know, this is what I would say, Arlene, what I would say for future. Like, hey, I really have a need for everybody to get their needs met in this relationship. I really care about you getting your needs met as much as I care about me getting my needs met. You know, would you be willing to engage in some really transparent dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable?
Let me ask you a question, because I've used humor, oftentimes sarcasm, as a passive aggressive approach. I mean, in other words, and again, I think sometimes it's because I'm feeling conflicted. I'm feeling, you know, I have mixed emotions, or maybe I just don't feel safe. And again, you know, and I'm just aware that sometimes I even use humor as a way to try to articulate it. I recognize it's not effective, you know, but sometimes it just comes out, and then it's like the words come out and then I realize I just did it. Like I
Well,
don't catch it beforehand.
humor is a way to take the edge off, right?
Okay.
So we make a joke because we're uncomfortable with feelings.
Okay.
We're uncomfortable with emotions. Okay. And
Yeah.
most people will make jokes as a way to deal with stress or stressful situations, or as a way
Yeah.
to deflect from the intensity of the emotion that lies at the surface. Okay.
Yeah.
So, jokes have their place. Of course, we all want to laugh in our relationships, but if you're trying to communicate an unmet need, a joke is not a good strategy, especially if you want to be taken seriously. Right. So, so it's all about being willing to take personal responsibility. If I'm just like, oh, I'm just playing, or that was just a joke, I'm not owning what I need. I'm not taking responsibility for how I'm showing up. And I'm not asking you to take me seriously.
Yeah.
Right. I'm asking you to laugh along with me and hoping that you got the message. Right. This is insane. Right. And then we wonder why we're not getting our needs met. If you can't have a direct conversation with the person that you're in a relationship with, or that you're dating, or that you're considering dating, there's no point.
Well, do you think, I often wonder if there's this, and I call it a fantasy approach to relationships, that when you meet the right person, it's just going to magically work out easy,
Yeah.
And what I've observed, even when I look at even my significant relationships and even some of my shorter lived relationships, they've all been opportunities for me to learn something about myself.
Of course. That's what they're for.
And I've come to this realization just even recently in my own life. I think on some level I've looked at relationships to rescue me.
Yeah. From what?
If I'm being really honest with myself.
Yeah, of course.
And the irony is I wrote a book about self-love, but they often say you teach what you have to learn.
100%.
And the more I evolve, the more I realize how much I don't love myself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I don't know how to, I'm saying it kind of in a gauge fashion, like, or filling a cup. And it occurs to me that I've relationships have triggered my own lack of self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence.
That's their job. That's their job. That's what they do. We agree to partner with another person. We think we want happily ever after, but what we're really agreeing to is personal development, growth edge, getting triggered, having a spotlight shine on all the places where we do not love ourselves sufficiently, all of our insecurities, all of our inadequacies. This is what the contract that we make. Whether we're conscious of it or not, when we enter into partnership with another person, it's into me see, right? You're going to see into me. You're going to see all of me. And then you're going to show me the parts of myself that I can't see. I'm going to see them through your eyes. And I might not like what I see, but it's going to be such an opportunity for me to grow, to heal, to learn to love myself more. We go into relationships sometimes, oftentimes unconscious partnerships with the hopes that that person is going to love us enough, or to fill our cup, to love us in ways that we cannot love ourselves. And what ends up happening is, all that relationship does is it triggers my own awareness of how much I really deeply don't love myself, right? Why have I allowed this? Why have I entertained this? How did I co-create this? Why did I stay in this for as long as I did? Why do we keep getting frustrated because the people are not giving us the love that we want? When in the end, it's our job to love ourselves. And the people that don't love us properly teach us that. They're only mirroring back to us our own relationship to love. And that is hard to hear. It can be very triggering, especially if you're in a relationship where you feel like you're trying everything and you're giving everything and you're just not getting the love that you want. It's important to recognize, like, why are we tolerating that? Why are we allowing this? Right? There's some
let me ask you.
Yeah.
So one person is feeling a depletion in their love cup. The other person feels relatively full. At some point, it's going to be exhausting to be with that person whose love cup isn't full.
Point of attraction. There's no point of attraction. There's no point of attraction when two people.
Elaborate on that.
Yeah. So there's no point of attraction when two people's cup is not at the same place.
Okay.
There isn't, there is, it's not as something that's sustainable. You might be initially attracted because there's a physical connection, because
Yeah.
there's chemistry, the stuff that usually happens in the first 3 months, which isn't, most of it is just pheromones, right? And so when we get into the actual longevity of a relationship, there's no point of attraction if you're vibrating at a different frequency, right? Like if you are a person who has a practice, who loves yourself, who has a healthy self-esteem, who has healthy self-confidence, who's healed a lot of your trauma and your wounds, and you're in a relationship with someone who's not there, right? They're still in a lot of pain, right?
Yeah.
That's not going to be attractive to you. It's not going to be attractive to you.
Well,
So
but some people are, fixers, they're enablers. They'll hold on to that person because there's something they like about that person, but they're holding on for that change or growth within that person.
okay, so that whoever's the fixer or the enabler is also suffering from some deep feeling of inadequacy and insecurity.
Okay.
Okay, because the wounds don't have to look the same. They don't
Okay.
have to be outwardly expressed with the same behaviors. Okay, but the level of wounding is still the same. The frequency is still a match. Okay, so if I love myself fully and I honor myself fully and I have a healthy relationship with myself fully and I'm embodied in unconditional love, a person who's like that, you're right, I am going to want to love them enough to let them go and to let them go find the help they need. I can't be the one to help you. Does that make sense? There's
Yeah,
no
no.
action. And I mean, have you ever been in a relationship, Jonathan, with somebody who's just in so much pain? You're just like, you know what? You need to go and work on yourself. Like you need to go and heal your own wounds. Like I can't hold this space for you, right? Like it's not right. Like it's just you're not ready for what it is that I'm looking for. You're just not in that place.
Well, because I'm not a therapist by any stretch of the means, but there's an element of what I do that has counseling associated with it. I have found myself in circumstances where I've effectively taken on the counselor role. And I recognize within myself that it was my way of giving to this relationship because I genuinely cared for this person.
But there's more to the story. It's not just because you genuinely care. I mean, listen, I love you, and I know that it's not just because you genuinely care. And not to put you on the spot, but like when you're taking on the therapist role, whether it's you or me or anybody else, and I've done it too. Okay, so you're not alone in this. When we take on that fixer role, there's usually a deeper need to be needed that we also need to.
Yes.
It's not just because we care. It's also because we want to secure our place in the relationship.
Yeah.
Those of us that have had abandonment issues, that are anxious, that need to feel relevant in a relationship, will gravitate towards the ones who need us for everything, because that will make sure that we never get abandoned. That will secure our relationship, right? And this person's never going anywhere because they need me for everything. I'm the therapist, I'm this, I'm the whatever. Go down the list, And so I would say that even in that situation, your love cup isn't as full as you think it is, right? That's why, again, the point of attraction is this is universal law. You can't attract that which you are not. It's impossible.
So, by the way, we have Sassy who wrote, getting into a relationship will always reveal a lot. Is one truly ready and capable, as well as what areas need work? The real stuff will always appear.
100%.
It's interesting because I've observed that, we humans have a capacity to gaslight ourselves. And let me explain what I mean. And I noticed this across the board with my coaching clientele or the men that they're dating and that sort of things, that a person believes that they're ready for a relationship. And then they enter into a relationship with someone and, everything is kind of happy and go lucky in the beginning because the pheromones, as you talked about, and the chemistry. And then all of a sudden, and it can happen relatively quickly, all of a sudden our stuff starts to bubble up and surface.
Yeah, of course.
It could be a pain from the ending of a significant relationship. It could be, some people have money wounds around the capacity to have the resources to be in a relationship. Some people have health issues. I mean, there's some people have things going on with their family or whatnot that can be stressors, but they find themselves going, oh, I'm only capable of this level of a relationship. But relationships come with it a fair amount of emotional responsibility.
100%.
And and
But
and what
responsibility is, you know, is mostly of the person who's bringing in all the issues, right? I mean, it's a joint. You're responsible for your own experience, just like the
sure.
other person is responsible for their own experience. So I don't want to create this idea that we're taking on other people's wounds.
No, I meant, but relationships inherently have, if I care for you, I'm caring about your feelings. And when you're feeling down or there's something going on in your life, if I care about you, well, all of a sudden now I have to take on that responsibility if I care. Because if I don't, well, I don't, well,
I
in other
disagree.
words, if I care,
Yeah.
then
That's
I
good.
mean, well, are you telling me? Well, I'm curious to hear how you feel
Oh,
about
this is
this.
good. No, this is good. This is good.
Okay.
So you're not responsible for anybody's feelings
That's
ever.
not what I'm saying. I'm not
Mhm.
saying, but effectively, if someone's in pain, you start to feel pain and to want to just be there to comfort them or to be there for them takes effort. Meaning, if you want to have a healthy relationship, it's going to take effort, and that effort is a responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are responsible for being empathetic and caring and loving and supportive in
Yes.
relationships. But this, like, here's what I want to say. If you really love somebody and you really care about them and you see them in pain, it's a natural instinct. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel like an obligation. It doesn't feel like this is something I have to do or something now I'm responsible for this thing. Now I've taken on this thing. Like
Yeah.
it's a natural instinct, when you care about each other, even as friends, we care about each other. You're in pain. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to be
Yeah.
able there to support you. And I would say to anybody who's in a relationship, like you can hold space and you can be empathetic and you can like your job is not to help be responsible for the person's feelings or to help them out of pain. As I said at the beginning, we're not here to be rescued from our pain.
Yeah.
Your job is to simply hold space and allow that person to lead themselves out of pain. Okay.
Well,
So we
but
do
is
that.
holding space a responsibility within a relationship?
Yes, I would say
Okay,
so.
there you
I,
go.
I would say so. But just like being accountable,
Yeah.
to the other person, like you create
Yes.
agreements that work for you, right?
Yeah.
And look, you can create all kinds of agreements, there isn't like a standard set, but there you would create this agreement where like, okay, and this is like I said, it's a natural instinct to want to hold space, to want to be there for someone to the capacity that doesn't max out your energy, for
Yeah.
example, right? So Lynn says, yes, very true. You should want to support them. Of course, I mean, but this is natural. This is not something we have to try to do. It's natural to want to support people.
Oh, well, let me challenge you on that. You say it's natural, but I've observed it's for a lot of people that's
Mhm,
uncomfortable. Like,
mhm.
because if we're struggling within our own self and our own needs,
Yeah.
okay, to being met, and now you're in a relationship with someone, there's that holding space requires effort, as we just talked about. For a lot of people, that's not an easy task. We make it like, I think there's this glorification that if we love someone, we're just going to, we'll just happily go along with helping them wherever they're at, so
No,
to
I
speak.
disagree with that. I disagree with that. And what I was saying is
Okay.
you can give emotional support to the extent to at your maximum capacity. Like we all have a
Okay.
maximum capacity, right? Like, okay,
Got it.
now
Got it.
it's starting to drain me. Now it's starting to, feel like I really have nothing left to give. And this could be
Yeah.
something we can communicate with NVC, like I would
Yeah.
love to keep listening. I would love to keep helping you work through this. And I'm noticing that I need a break, or I'm noticing that I need to, I've reached maximum capacity for empathetic listening, whatever statements you may have. Kathy, hi, Canadian. I'm Canadian too. Wouldn't that be fearful avoidant if you're scared to support the other person? I mean, we can categorize it. We can
Yeah.
certainly categorize it, Kathy, and say, sure, that's fearful avoidant, but that doesn't help us get our needs met, right? That's one thing I love about NVC is that we're not using labels and diagnosis, right? So we're just looking at, are you willing to support me in getting my need met? Right?
Mm.
Can you hold space for me? I'm having like this is something I teach my daughter. My daughter is 8 years old and she'll come to me, she'll say, Mama, I need you to hold space for me. right? Because I've taught her that when she's having big feelings, that's what I can do is I can hold space for her while she has her emotions. Okay. And, and then we work through it together. I support her as she communicates, and then we're done. Right. And so there has to be an instinct to want to be in that experience. Now, if your partner, there's so many layers to this, Jonathan, if your partner doesn't have a responsible way of communicating their feelings, holding space might seem scary. And if you've
Yes.
been in situations, especially in a caregiver environment, where emotions were chaotic and your parents were volatile, other people's reactions might feel scary, might make you uncomfortable, right? And so you would shut down. With enough skill and coaching and learning, you can say, hey, I feel triggered around big feelings. I need some time to get used to, your emotions, right? So that I can really be there for you. Here we
By the
go.
way, I want you to read this one because it relates to exactly what you just said.
I'm reading them. Okay. I was guilty of making the guy I'm talking to into my therapist, and he had to tell me my depression was starting to affect him too. There you go. Good for him. Good
Yeah.
for him. First of all, I want to acknowledge that, that must have been hard to hear, right? And I also want to acknowledge him for having the courage to say, it's too much. Like, I've reached maximum capacity for
Yeah.
listening. There are times in relationships where you've got to set good boundaries. I mean, we always have to set good boundaries. But especially if your partner really needs a therapist ear or needs to work through things, to encourage them to get the appropriate support, you read this one.
Holding space for anyone is being compassionate, considerate, loving, caring, romantic, or not. If someone doesn't want to hold space for another, do they really want to be with that person? And
But
I want to address this.
Mhm.
I wasn't very good at this. This was something I had to learn. I'm reacting to this question because, and again, there's this expectation that when you care for someone, you should just naturally know how to do this and be good at it.
No,
And
no.
this is not like holding space. And by the way, I believe me, I have a sister who I love dearly, and holding space for her, and she drives me crazy. I mean, she's neurotic like nobody's business, and holding space for her sometimes reaches and I mean, in the beginning of my life, I used to just push her away, push her away, push her away because it was too much. I learned holding space, but then it gets to a place where, as compassionate as I am, like the previous comment, like, this is starting to affect me.
Yeah, that's what you need, boundaries. You need boundaries.
Yeah.
We have to have boundaries, right? Just because we're in partnership doesn't mean, it's kind of like, I want to introduce this idea of like booking time with your significant other, like, especially when you live together, oftentimes we feel like we can just, if the person's in the room, we can just start throwing up our feelings all over them, or we can just start talking to them about whatever, just because they happen to be in the same vicinity. It's really important to check in with your partner, with the person that you're dating, your family member, whoever it is you want to talk to, and say, I would like to share some things. Is now a good time?
Yeah.
This is a boundary, right? I'm respecting boundaries. I have space to listen to you. Please share, right? And then you have your holding space session. And if you get maxed out and it feels like it's not going anywhere, you can say, listen, I've reached my limit. I would love to help you more. I would love to listen more, but I feel at a loss to help you. Perhaps you might need, a more professional resource, or perhaps you need, a girlfriend, or perhaps you need, a different type of container, right? Like, we're not, of course, we want to get our needs met most of the time. And here's the thing, most of the time we go into a relationship when we haven't done inner work and we haven't healed our inner child stuff and we're not familiar with what our needs are. We go into a relationship and we expect our significant other to be our everything, right?
Yes.
To be everything to us, to be mom, dad, friend, cheerleader, business coach, therapist, all of the things, right? And these are unreasonable expectations. Okay, we don't want to take the pressure off our relationship. The partner is there co-creating, coexisting alongside you, having their own human experience, having their own set of needs. So partnership should really be about amplification of love, co-creating values, exemplifying a mutual shared idea of what life looks like, of, bringing forward this love, sharing it with other people. Joe Daisy, I love your name. Isn't it ironic how an extra special relationship will reflect our wounded inner child? Of course, it's not ironic. It's just a fact. You know?
Well, time out, Sabrina. You say it's a fact,
Mhm.
but this is like, I mean, you and I operate from a spiritual perspective, like
Ah,
we called this in, but most people don't recognize this. I
yeah.
mean,
Well, so let's address it.
yeah.
Your relationship is always going to trigger your inner child stuff every single time. Even it doesn't matter how spiritual you are, even
Yeah.
for you and me, Jonathan. Like it doesn't matter how
Oh no,
spiritual you.
but I mean, the average person isn't looking at the relationship from a spiritual point of
Yeah,
view as you and I do. We look at, I mean, at least this is the way I operate. You know, we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and I chose this experience. I mean, everything that I'm experiencing on some spiritual level, I chose. I don't think the average person walks and thinks in that container kind of thing. That's
right.
why when you say, of course, I just don't think everybody thinks that way.
Yeah. Well, I hope that I hope that this talk is
Yeah.
helpful because I really want to empower everybody with this context. Like it's not, first of all, that what happens in a relationship, whether it's dating or a long-term relationship, is first of all, it's not personal. Okay. It feels personal, but it's not. Okay. We bring our unresolved wounds to a relationship, and that relationship will mirror our unresolved wounds so that we can heal them. That is the purpose of the special relationship, so that you can heal, so that you can learn to love yourself more fully, more completely, whether that means loving yourself so much that you realize this person's not for you, this person's not worthy of you, or you love yourself so much to attract the right person who can meet you at that level of love and compassion and unconditional acceptance. So that's what they're meant to do. And so when someone is triggering you in a relationship or hurting you in a relationship, the first question you want to ask yourself is, when was the last time I felt this way? Right? Where do I remember feeling like this? What happened in my relationship with my father or my relationship with my mother that set me up to re-experience this wound over and over and over again? That's the answer, right?
By the way, I just posted, if anyone wants to ask a question of Sabrina and I live, I just posted a link. I'll do it again. We'll get you on live right now. You can ask a question.
Yeah, come and be in the show. We'd love to have you.
Okay, we have another question that came in from, hold on a second. Oh, I want to thank Roller Girl for the $1.99 super sticker. By the way, folks, if you want to, first off, ask a question, write the word question, post the question thereafter, or you can purchase a super sticker, super chat. There's a little $ in the chat box. All the monies from the super sticker, super chat goes to a scholarship fund in the name of my son, Connor Asley. That's a picture of him right there with his brother Colin and myself. He's my son who passed away 6.5 years ago. And his honor, we donate to causes like the Hoffman Process Insight Institute and scholarships to coaching as well. Our goal is $50, so we need 48 more dollars to get to the goal. Thank you, Roller Girl. And if you want to talk to Sabrina live right now, I just posted a link in the chat box. So I saw another question here from Sunshine Beauty.
Hi, Sunshine.
Do you help with attachment styles? I've never been in a committed relationship and I don't know how to. I've worked on myself and I've tried, no success yet. I want to comment on something before you answer this, Sabrina.
Sure.
I don't know how to. I want to acknowledge that statement. I really want to give her a lot of props to say, I don't know how to be in a relationship. Like, that's brave to say that, because I think we have this expectation that everybody knows how to be in a romantic relationship with someone else. And honestly, I'm still trying to figure it out, and I've been at it for a long time.
Yeah. Well,
do you help with attachment styles?
Sure. I don't think although as much as I appreciate where you're coming from, and I want to acknowledge that there is a deep desire to learn how to be in a committed relationship. I don't think that's the right question. It's not about helping with attachment styles. It's about learning what it means to be committed. Like, what does it actually mean to be committed? Being ready to be in a committed relationship. If you've never been in one because you don't know how to, chances are there's probably a lot of fear happening whether it's conscious or unconscious, and you might be blocking it. Right? You might be blocking it out because the idea of being in a committed relationship can bring up a lot of unresolved issues. Okay, so learning how, it's not about learning how to attach, it's just about learning how to be in a genuine experience of love and being able to express that love in a way where you feel safe to, right? And
All right,
so,
you just opened a can of, well, you opened, I was going to say a can of worms, but I want your take on something.
sure.
There is a lot of content out in the relationship realm, particularly centered around attachment styles, meaning that there's an insecure, secure attachment style. And within insecure, there's anxious, fearful avoidant, and dismissive avoidant.
Yep.
But you said something a moment ago.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to be committed? Like, so I'm not to suggest that there isn't value in understanding attachment styles, but I think that question might be the most important question to ask when you're beginning to form a relationship with someone.
100%. 100%. I mean, we take it for granted, but commitment requires presence. It requires awareness. It requires emotional availability. It requires courage, right?
Yeah.
It requires adaptability, a willingness to rearrange your life, reorganize your way of operating. It's like a commitment requires it's an adjustment. It's an adjustment to the way of living your life, right? And it requires vulnerability and transparency and a willingness to trust. So commitment is, this is the big work, is what does it mean to be committed? Right? What does it mean to just put yourself in a situation where you now agree to co-create life with this person, to care about this person, to be accountable to this person, to share love with this person, to communicate your needs with this person, to invite this person into your life, and to invite them into your inner, not just your outer circumstances, but your inner life. It requires a lot of tending, right? You can't just be in a relationship and hope it'll work. Right. And just agree to, okay, you and me, we're going to do this thing. Like, it's just, it takes a fair amount of awareness and conversation and dialogue to be able to create something that works for everybody.
So you just, and by the way, I love what you just shared in the last 2 minutes. And I want to take it another level, because I want to start with, like, from first date to what you described. Okay. Like, that takes a really, I think a fair amount, almost ninja level of awareness to, I mean, most people ambivalently enter into relationships. They unconsciously enter into relationships, and particularly even just their understanding of what commitment is. What you just described, first off, was beautiful. So I just want to give you a hug for that. I really appreciate it. But I look at relationships with a couple layers of commitment. I want your take on this, okay? I always say level 1 of commitment starts with the agreement of monogamy and exclusivity, mainly because most couples enter into relationship today oftentimes from a physical perspective. They're physically spending time together. As soon as you start kissing, you're sharing bodily fluids. And as soon as you start getting even more romantic on a sexual level, that they agree to monogamy and exclusivity.
Right.
I say the second
you should be agreeing. The first step, you should be agreeing to tell the truth, right? The first step is agree to tell the truth to each other. That should be the first point of entry. You should not be having sex with someone you don't trust. Okay. You should not be being physical with someone that you don't have some kind of agreement of transparency and truthfulness. That should be step 1. Okay. So this is, can you trust this person? Do you feel comfortable telling this person the truth? Do you believe that this person is telling you the truth? Like, you got to trust your body on that one. Okay. So I don't mean to leapfrog over what you were saying, but that would be the first step. I really just want to make sure that everybody gets this. Like, so many of us, and I invite everyone to just take a moment of deep self-reflection. How much time do you spend hoping that things are what you believe them to be, hoping that things will turn out the way you want them to turn out, hoping that you're going to get your needs met without ever advocating for yourself? right? So if we take all the hope out of this by being conscious, being direct, being truthful, having, clear ways of communicating, then we know, without further ado, we know who we can go the long term with, and who's not for us, right? And that we save ourselves a whole world of suffering.
Well, all right. Well, I'm going to challenge this for a moment, okay, and just play with me. I'm not being devil's advocate per se, but
Mhm.
you can certainly, two people can go, I'm going to tell the truth, you tell the truth. But to get to the truth of a person is different than agreeing to tell the truth. Um, to get to the truth of a person,
Sure.
that takes a fair amount. You could spend years trying to get to the real truth of a person. That's what intimacy is, getting to the truth of a person.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
it's fair to say that you can only get to the truth that a person is even aware of within themselves, right?
exactly,
So,
exactly, exactly.
so let's say, let's create a new principle of relationship, right?
Okay.
Let's say that we agree to get to the truth of ourselves together.
Okay.
What a great, way to begin a serious commitment with someone. We agree to help each other and support each other get to the truth of ourselves together.
Hmm.
I'm willing to go deeper within myself to share it with you. You're willing to go deeper within yourself to share it with me. And together we can create transparency along the way. And now we're building trust as we go, right?
Okay, so I'm a dating coach. So,
Yeah.
but that's not necessarily per
You
se.
can use
Huh?
that. You
No,
can
no,
use
I
that.
get that. But okay, so I want you to play with me for a second.
Yeah, of course.
When do you have that conversation? First date, second date, third date? Like, when do you have that conversation?
Listen, if you're on a first date and the chemistry's good and you like the person, and overall it sort of checks out, it's a reasonable situation that looks like it could work, have the conversation.
Okay.
Have the conversation. I would say between date 1 and 2, don't waste time. Don't waste time. I mean, don't waste time.
Okay. All right. So we've agreed that layer one of commitment is the agree to tell the truth. Okay. That's
Mhm.
I'm going to revamp all my other content. I always say the minute two people become physical is that monogamy and exclusivity. In other words, agreeing that you're not going to be actively seeking to meet other
Sure.
people. You're going to
Sure.
be, if you're having physical intimacy, that's an agreement. I've noticed that the next level of commitment, or at least what begins to form, is when two people operate as teammates with one another. In other words, they begin to integrate into each other's lives, operating on some level of teammate. Does that feel true for you from your vantage point?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. If you feel like you've met someone who meets your value system, that you feel like you can get your needs met, then you start to collaborate and co-create life together.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree
Okay.
that's
And then I say that the next level of commitment after that is going all in. That's like that, like, I've got your back. I'm going to be there for you. I mean, it's kind of the wedding vows in a way, rich or poor, sickness and health. Like, I'm all in this.
yeah.
And I think a lot of couples just get stuck in that monogamy exclusivity range. Some of them get to that teamwork integration life, but there's another shift that happens when you're all in. Like, okay, I'm going to take this person for who they are 100%.
Hmm. Do you know what the missing factor is in all those levels that keeps you
What's
stuck? The truth.
hmm
So if you agree to tell the truth from the very beginning,
yeah.
there's nothing holding you back from being all in. And there's nothing holding you back from deciding early on, maybe this isn't going to work for us. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
So we want to take the anxiety and the stress and the second guessing and the panic and the obsessiveness and all of that anxious stuff that comes up for people, when you're dating and you're going into a relationship with someone and you're wondering if this is the right person, and so on. Like, let's just take all of that out. If we remove this experience by having the courage to tell the truth about yourself and to require the truth of the other person and to set that as a precedent for the relationship, you can be in transparent dialogue. You can,
Yeah.
for as long as it takes to decide whether or not there is a long-term compatibility here. And then you can truthfully tell each other, look, I don't think this is going to work for me. And then there's no hard feelings because you've been transparent the whole time. Right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So if the truth actually takes away all of this noise and all of this, unfortunate experience that most people have when they're trying to find the right person, right?
I've come to realize for myself that throughout my life, I don't think I was being truly truthful with myself.
Yeah.
Particularly in my past relationships, and only because I do delve in the realm of attachment style, I have found myself insecurely attached to other people, mostly from an anxious vantage point. And because of that, I wasn't speaking my truth to the other person. I think it's only recently that I've even gotten to a place where I recognize that genuine authenticity, but more importantly, transparency. And you said earlier, transparency is the currency to trust. Absolutely. I wrote that down. I love that. Yeah. And I'm not sure that I've ever done that before until most recently in my life. And by the way, transparency isn't always pretty. Transparency isn't, it's actually, in my particular case, it's radically messy because what's going on for me on the inside, there's a lot of turmoil going on for me on the inside.
I love that you said that. First of all, I really want to acknowledge you because it takes a lot of courage to admit that and to say, like, look, I haven't always been honest with myself, right? But that's why we said that you can only be truthful to the degree that you're with the other person, to the degree that you're being truthful with yourself, right? But if you go into a relationship saying, I don't know how to do this perfectly, but I'm willing to explore the truth of myself with you because I feel safe enough with you, then let's explore the truth of each other together. Then we've created a sane and healthy foundation for something that is potentially beautiful and long-term.
So I love this brief conversation we've had. What does it mean to be committed? What does it mean to be committed? I've really appreciated this conversation.
Me too. Me too. And nobody wants to be coached.
What's that?
Nobody wants to be coached. Come on.
Yeah. Well, okay. By the way, if anyone wants to comment on what just said, I want to post a comment below. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Okay. Next question.
Sure.
What is an example of someone telling the truth? Okay, that would be good. Well, I'll share something from my personal life. I've had a circumstance where I had thought I had healed from a past relationship. Mm-hmm. And as I began entering into a new relationship, a lot of the residue from my past relationship began to surface. And I was having mixed feelings. I was having a lot of conflicting feelings going on. And I know in the past, I would have repressed that. I wouldn't have said anything. I would have just kept it to myself. And to me, telling the truth is, again, identifying what's going on. All of this past residue is happening. And it wasn't intentional. And I'll be candid with you. In all fairness, I had thought I'd healed from this past relationship. But a new relationship brought it all to the surface. And to me, coming back to transparency is the current cornerstone of the currency of trust, or really truth. I had to share this with this person because I had committed to being my authentic self, to be my truthful self, to the best that I was aware of it. So, Catherine, that's one example of someone telling their truth. Is even though it was uncomfortable to share, I knew this could cause this person to move on. And it might be a reflection that I wasn't ready for a relationship. At least telling the truth gives that other person some feedback to whether or not they want to continue to move on into the relationship.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example. Saying something, sharing something that could be potentially uncomfortable, that could put you at risk in the relationship, that could be a potential repellent to the other person. Taking a risk to share deep, vulnerable things about yourself is an example of telling the truth. And I think that we all owe that to each other, honestly, because you want to be in a relationship. You want to know that the person loves you for who you are. How are you going to know that if you're not telling the truth, right?
Yeah. Let's wrap up with this last question. Sassy says, we definitely want everyone to be truthful to themselves and to others. Should be given. However, it's not always the case. This is why it takes time to really get to know one another.
Yeah, it does. And it just takes time to develop the courage to be honest with each other. It really does. We say it takes time to get to know each other, and I appreciate the comment, but it really just takes time to develop the courage to be straight, to be transparent, to identify what our needs are, to advocate for ourselves, and to learn how to develop the courage to be in partnership, to be, to take on this thing that we're referring to as commitment, which is a big undertaking, for those of us that are morally aware, morally conscious, and want to be responsible towards the people that we care about,
And I also think that, if we start from this place as, again, being as honest with yourself as possible and being transparent with another person, if you start from that foundation, you can actually get to know someone quickly. And you might find that, hey, look, two people might not be a good fit for one another. That's totally like
good. It's totally okay.
Yeah, I think sometimes we try, because you're in this container of honesty and commitment and emotional communicativeness, you're like, oh, I've just found this great person to be with, but it still might mean that two people aren't right for each other. And that's okay too. I think we get hung up that we have to stick it out sometimes because you have all this great communication and understanding and transparency. But sometimes two people aren't a fit, and you got the lesson you need to learn in that experience within that container. And it's okay to say, hey, like, we're not meant to go the distance. And that's okay too.
100%. I think that takes the pressure off everybody.
Yeah. Hey, Sabrina, I am so grateful that you jumped on and we could talk about all of this stuff. This is like ninja level understanding of relationships. When I get with you, I think I'm learning ninja level skills. And I say this because, relationships aren't for the faint of heart. I really do believe you have to be willing to put your heart on the line to some degree, but at the same time, just like a ninja has to practice skills, communication skills, and holding space, and all the things we talked about. This is something that, is well, anyway, I'm just grateful that you shared with us today.
Me too. I'm so grateful to be here. I always love these conversations with you, and I love your audience. And thank you so much for all the beautiful questions. I hope this was helpful to people. Thank you, Kathy.
Catherine said, commitment is a scary prospect. I think I want to touch upon that before we wrap up.
Sure.
It can be scary to open yourself up to another human being, and to really, build that level of trust. Because when you open your heart to someone, I'm not suggesting that we're giving them permission to hurt us or anything like that. And it's certainly, I believe, when we maintain our sovereignty, nobody can actually hurt us when we maintain our own sovereignty.
We have to get there. We have to get there.
Yeah. And it can be scary to open up to another person. So
sure can. But it's only scary if we fear being rejected, if there's parts of ourselves that we don't love and accept. So if you do the work to really love and accept yourself radically, every part of you, including the things that you might regret or be ashamed of, or things you've done in your past, and so on. Like, if you could really do the work to love yourself radically and unconditionally, then letting someone in to see all of you, first of all, is a gift to both parties, and it can really enrich the experience of a relationship. I would encourage everybody to work through their fear, do your inner child work, identify your needs, learn how to communicate them, and honor yourself when you're dating and choosing people to be in a relationship with.
Always enjoy Sabrina's presence. Great discussion. Thank you, Sabrina and Jonathan, for bringing her back. Yes, she's my most returning guest.
Yeah,
I'm grateful for that.
I'm so flattered. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you. Well, join me on Oracle Hour every Wednesday. Am I allowed to plug that?
Yeah. So everyone, if you want to connect with Sabrina, there's a link below to go to her website, Intuitive Sabrina. Also, she has a YouTube channel. Every Wednesday, she has a live reading. She's a wait, you're not a mystic. What are you? An oracle?
A spiritual mentor and a psychic. Yes.
Yeah. And she gives me psychic readings all the time. So if you want some help in that area, check out the link, connect with Sabrina Goat. Sabrina Rising is her YouTube channel, and you can check her out there.
Yes, please come check me out. Come bring me your questions, and I'm happy to guide you. I love to channel.
Okay. Sabrina Rising. All right,
Yeah.
Sabrina, can I reach into the camera and give you a big, gigantic Jonathan Bear hug of appreciation?
You sure can. Thank you so much for having me. Lots of love to you. Lots of love to everybody. And be
Big
safe.
hugs. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Wishing you all a super duper wonderful night. Bye now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.